Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Ayin Bet of Masechet Avodah Zarah. We are in the fifth and final chapter. Let me share my screen and we'll really get started. Um, yesterday, we learned a Mishnah that if a Jew sells wine to an idolater, one should fix the price before measuring out the wine. Otherwise, the wine will become yayin nesech in the possession of the Jew, causing the payment for it to be prohibited because we're not allowed to benefit from yayin nesech. And we saw two explanations of the Mishnah. What exactly was the Mishnah discussing? Amemar says that the Mishnah is showing that Mashiach works, meaning that when the wine is poured for the Jew, for the non-Jew effectively takes ownership of that wine immediately, because he is holding the container or the container belongs to him. And so as a result, the transfer happens immediately. And the reason that it can happen immediately is because the price has been set. And so as a result, it applies, even if no payment has been made, as long as the price is set, Mashiach works, everything is great. If the price is not set, however, because there's no meeting of the minds in connection with the effort to acquire, meaning the person who's making the acquisition doesn't know for sure he's going to make the acquisition. Maybe the guy is going to ask for too much, and so it won't be a full transaction. So he doesn't have in his intention when he's acquiring it the full acquisition intention necessary. And therefore, that's the story according to Amemar. According to Rav Ashi, however, Mashiach does not work for a non-Jew. Rather, the only way that you make an acquisition is you pay something. Only by paying something does the transaction take effect. And in fact, our Mishnah is talking about where a down payment was made. And so as a result, but we still have that same conclusion, meaning the Mishnah itself referenced the distinction between where the price was set and where the price was not set. And so everybody's going to agree with that. And in fact, Rav Ashi would tell you that if in fact the price was set, well, then the down payment makes the acquisition and everything's great. But if in fact there was no fixing of the price, well, again, just like the Mashiach doesn't work when there's no fixing of the price, so too the down payment doesn't work when there's no fixing of the price. And so those were the two attempts to understand our Mishnah. Again, according to Amemar, our Mishnah based on Mashiach, and Rav Ashi says, no, Mashiach doesn't work. And so we tried three times. Two times to support Rav Ashi, one time to support Amemar. We tried three times to figure out who was right, and we could not figure out who was right. And we are now picking up with the fifth to last line on Ayin Aleph Amud Bet. Amrle Ravina. We're going to make a fourth and final attempt to determine whether Mashiach works for a non-Jew. And we're going to come to the conclusion that Mashiach does work. Let's take a look. Amrle Ravina Ravashi. Tashma de Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ben Noach Nerag al Pachos Mishava Pruta. That in fact a Noachite, meaning somebody who's not Jewish, will be punished with death for stealing even something that's less than a value of a pruta. Velo nitan laheshavon, and it's not appropriate. There's no rule associated with returning it. Okay, so now, so doesn't this show that that Mashiach in fact works? Because after all, the im amrit, and let's take a look at the aleph. The isal kadaitach, some people will change it to Mashiach ba'ovid kochavim einokona. And if you say or think that Mashiach does not work for a non-Jew, amay nerag. Why is he being killed? After all, he hasn't actually taken possession of the item. The item still belongs fully to the person he stole it from. And so as a result, doesn't that show that in fact that all works? No, not necessarily. Mishum ditzare liyisrael. No, we can say that it's based on the pain and the aggravation and the trouble that was caused by this non-Jew by stealing less than a shavapruta to the Jew. And so that's why he deserves to die. Umay solo nitan lahishavon. So then what does it mean when we say that it's not subject to being returned? As Rashi tells us, second line down on Ayin Bet Amud Aleph, from the top of in the wide lines of Rashi. Umay lo nitan lahishavon. Halo shayach behishavon. Well, one second. If in fact we see that that when you do Mashiach, when a non-Jew does Mashiach, according to Rav Ashi, that there's no acquisition associated with it. Well, why would you even think that there could be any possibility of returning the item? You haven't taken anything. So why does the Gemara, why does Rabbi Chia bar Abba in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, why does he mention even at all this concept of return? The Kevan de Obikochavim lo Kanya, as back into Rashi, still second line of the wide lines of Rashi at the top of the daf, that since the non-Jew does not in fact acquire D'Yisrael, it belongs to the Jew. So why are you telling me that that there's no application of returning it? It doesn't even belong to the guy. He can't return it. There's no possibility. So Rav Ashi explains, no, the Eino b'Torah hishavon. No, the point is that there is no rule of having to return it. As Rashi says, next Rashi, third now line of the top of Rashi, Kolomer Hakinami, you're absolutely right, Kamar. Eino b'Torah shum gzela. There was no possession, theft, to overkochavim, to call by the non-Jew, meaning the idolater didn't, even though he took something that was worth less than a shavapruta, he didn't actually make an acquisition of the item. To call heka to isa demarahi, because the whole thing, it still belongs to the person who owned it. And it would be in this, the truth is that this same principle would apply even if it was worth a pruta. And the only reason that we're talking about less than a shavapruta in Rabbi Yochanan's statement is l'shmeina deneragala, that even so he's still going to be killed as a result, this non-Jew. And so as a result, we've now solved this initial statement of Rabbi Yochanan. And so we're still in the middle of the fourth challenge. And so the challenge picks up the stick and says, 1 second.
So why wouldn't he return it?
What?
I don't understand. If it never belonged to him, and any item that's stolen really belongs to the original owner. So
it's a little different.
The person should return it to the original owner, right?
Well, because of the concept of Kimle b'derabamine, and this guy is going to be killed, there is no obligation to return it. But the bottom line is that since it never officially leaves the Jew's possession, because the Jew continues to own it, that's how Rav Ashi will have to understand it, because he doesn't believe that the Mashiach is Kona. So we don't. In the end, we're going to undermine this. So give me some more seconds, and we'll conclude that in fact the Mashiach must be Kona. But at the moment, Rav Ashi would tell you, no, the Mashiach is not Kona, and the no application of returning is because there is no concept of returning, because it's always still in the possession and ownership of the Jew. And yes, you'll argue, well, don't we say that same thing with respect to a thief of something from a Jew? No, if a Jew steals something from a Jew, and then lightning comes and burns it all up, that the thief, because he made an acquisition on the item, becomes responsible for anything that were to happen to it. And what we're saying is that would not be the case here, because it still belongs to the Jew, according to Rav Ashi. But Ihaki, 1 second, if you, Rav Ashi, want to say that, Ema Seifa, there is more language. The Gemara held back on telling us all of Rabbi Yochanan's statement, because what did Rabbi Yochanan continue to say, after telling us that if a non-Jew takes something that's less than a shavapruta, he's going to get killed for it, and he doesn't have to return it. If another non-Jew comes and takes it from that first non-Jew, nerag aleha, that second guy is also going to be killed as a result. So Bishlam Aresha, Mishum Ditzara Yisrael. I understand why the first guy's getting killed according to you, Rav Ashi, because he caused pain to the non-Jew, he caused pain to the Jewish owner. But Elaseva, my Ovid. But in the second case, if we say Mashiach isn't Kona, so the thief has not done anything, and there's no new pain caused to a Jew. So as a result, what has he done that he now deserves the death penalty? Ela shmami no, Mashiach ba'ovikochavim kona. No, it must be that Mashiach works for a non-Jew and shmami no. And in fact, that is how we conclude. And so as a result, we say that Mashiach does work for a non-Jew. That if a non-Jew picks something up, again, there has to be some kind of meeting of the minds in a general acquisition sense, but then he has acquired the item. Okay, so
No, I'm still a little puzzled. Now, even just yesterday, the OU office, a daily halacha and so forth. So yesterday they talked about stealing in the halacha. Said if someone steals something, he should return it. Well, however he steals it, whatever, and that's. But he said, and if he can't, if the item is destroyed, lost, burned, whatever, he can compensate with the monetary value. So I'm not
correct.
understanding this concept here. If you're saying that he doesn't have to return it because it
So
belonged to the Jew, they always belong to the original owner.
so two things. One is in the end, when we say Mashiach works, the reason that he doesn't have to return it is because it's less than a shava pruta. And as a result, the Jew is considered to be mochel onto anything less
Okay,
than a shava pruta.
all right.
Okay, so that's how we end. But if you're asking even in the middle, how could we possibly think that? You're absolutely right. The point is that what you've just outlined is the halacha for a Jew. The halacha can be different for a non-Jew. That the non-Jew would not have the obligation to return it because it never actually belonged to him, according to Rav Ashi. Again, this is only Rav Ashi, but it would never actually belong to him. He never actually took it out of the possession of the Jew, and therefore never took on those additional responsibilities. So you're absolutely right. According to the moment in the middle of our story, it seemed like the halakha that you learned yesterday would only be for Jews and would not apply to non-Jews. And for non-Jews, they would get killed no matter what, and there would be no obligation to return it, mostly for them because they were killed. And we have a concept of kimle b'derabim, that if you have two different punishments, one to return something and one to kill the person, only the one that you're going to kill the guy takes effect. So
He killed because he stole it?
Yeah, he's going to kill him because he stole it. That's exactly right.
That's the penalty for stealing, killing him.
For a non-Jew, correct. Essentially all of the Shiva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, they're all penalized with the death penalty. So, okay. So yep.
We used to hang horse thieves. That was
That's
notorious.
exactly right. 100%. 100%. Okay, so the Gemara is now going to apply the lesson of our Mishnah regarding the need to have a set price for a transaction to work to a different case. In order for a transaction to work, we're going to now apply that concept to a different case. So let's take a look. So, Hahu Gavra, we are, last word, fifth line, Ayin Bet Amud Aleph. Hahu Gavra da Amar Le Lechavre, I mizbinana la la'ara. If I end up selling this land, I'm gonna sell it to you. So I say, if I have a house, if I go ahead and I sell that house, I guarantee that I'm going to sell it to you, Stan. So now that having said that, and now I go and sell it to somebody else. So I'm Rav Yosef, kana kama. Stan actually made the acquisition of it, and Rashi tells us. Take a look, a third of the narrow lines in Rashi. The kanu mine bekinyan. That Stan made a kinyan to acquire the land from me based on my promise. So Rav Yosef says, well, because now I've transferred it, I've tried to sell my property to Mark. So as a result, I said if I sold it, I'm going to sell it to Stan. So as a result, Stan has acquired it. And Mark does not get it, even though it's his birthday. Amar le Abaye, okay, see you later. Amar le Abaye, Abaye says, no, that can't be. V'halo pasuk, they didn't set a price. Tamra, and whenever you don't have a price, you don't have an acquisition. As Rashi tells us, halo pasuk, Rishon, the first guy, namely Stan, Damim, they didn't set a price for him. V'lo samcha daite a kinyan. And so as a result, the kinyan wasn't a sufficient kinyan because it wasn't a certainty that he was going to be able to buy it. The savar, because the seller could think, im yirtza lachzor, if he wants to take back his offer, if I want to take back my offer, yarba alav b'dam. Oh, I could just say, oh, Dan, you want that piece of property that I have? Yeah, that's $30 million. You know, and Stan's never going to buy my property for $30 million. And so as a result, that's how I could get out of doing it. So doesn't that show? Okay. And umina, Tamer de kol hecha de lo pazak lo kana. And how do I know that that's the case? Titanan, because we have our Mishnah. Hamoker yeno le'ovid kochavim, pasak ad shalom madad. If you set the price before you do the measuring, damav mutar, and then the purchase price is permitted because it's a valid transaction. Madad ad shalom pasak, damav yasurin. And if you don't set the purchase price, well, then the purchase price is going to be prohibited. Then the purchase money is going to be prohibited because you're going to be selling yayin nezek. So doesn't that show that you have to set the price? Well, my hava Allah. So, all right. So, what was the decision about this? My hava Allah, kindakamrin, and I just told you our Mishnah shows that in fact, if you set the price, great. If you don't set the price, it's a problem. No, dilma chumra diye nezek shiny. Well, maybe that case is a little different. That because we want to be careful about yayin nezek, so that's why only if you want to set the price in order to transfer everything before it becomes yayin nezek. But maybe over here, maybe in other situations, we can be more generous. No, not necessarily. Tashma, I'll show you that in fact, the kinyan requires the setting of price. The Amar of Idi bar Avin, Uv Dahava Bei Rav Chisda. There was a story with Rav Chisda, but Rav Chisda Bei Rav Huna. And then Rav Chisda took it to the yeshiva of Rav Huna in order to get it answered. Upashte Mahad Titanya. And he learned it and figured out what the rule was based on, and if the letter bet takes us to changes it to Titania and Masoras Hashas, Mashach Chamar, and what was the brisa that was cited in order to answer the question as to whether or not the setting of a price is a necessary prerequisite for a transaction? Well, Mashach Chamaravu Poalav, if a buyer brings the worker that's holding the item to be sold, or the donkey drivers that are dragging the donkey that is carrying the items to be sold, and he brings them into his house. Well, he has not, even though he brought the items into his house, they're still being held by the seller's donkey or the seller's workers. And so as a result, there has been no acquisition, no mashicha really on the property itself. So Bain Pasak Ad Shalom Madad. As long if he hasn't set a price, even if he set a price, but he has not yet measured, well, then there's no transaction, because although he brought it into his possession, into his property, the items being sold are still being held by the seller's people or animals. And so as a result, that's not going to be a transaction. Uvein madad ad shalopas. Or if I take it off the animal, or I take it off the shoulders of the worker, and now I go ahead and I measure it, but I haven't yet set a price, lo kana, there hasn't been an acquisition. Ushneyan yecholon laxer behen. And because there hasn't been an acquisition, both I and the seller have the ability to retract the sale and undo it. Pergun, however, if I already unloaded and I brought the items into my house, well, now I've done Mashicha. Well, in that case, Pasak Ad Shalom Madad. Well, then, as long as I set the price, I've done the Mashicha, even if I haven't actually measured the amount, you can't undo it because I've set the price and I've done a Mashicha because I brought the items off of the animal and off of the worker. But on the other hand, madad ad shelo pasak, if I measured without setting the price. So even though I took the stuff off the shoulders and I've measured it, but we haven't set a price, both people can undo it. What do we see from here? The bottom line is both people can undo it. Take a look at Rashi. Madad ad shelo pasak shnei yichol lachzor kol zman shelo pasak. Anytime we haven't set a price, the medida lo mahanya. The measuring doesn't help midi at all. Or shuso lo kanya, and my property doesn't make an acquisition. Ade yifsok, until we set a price. Alma Mashicha below Pisuk lo kanya. So as a result, we see definitively that Mashicha without setting the price does not work. And so as a result, that is it. We are done with our first case. So
This is in addition to the Onav case where the price is set, but it's wrong.
yes. Well, if the price is set at a price that's too high or too low, there is also well, I think there might be some differences because here there's no Kinyan at all. You're right that with a Ona case that there's the opportunity to undo the transaction. But especially if it's a precisely Ona, if it's exactly 1/6, well then the transaction actually happened. And so as a result, if lightning were to strike at that particular moment, I don't know who would be responsible for the item. So yeah, there's a it's not that the transaction doesn't take effect. It's just that the transaction is undoable. So there's a difference between those two cases. Okay, so Hahu Gavra. Now we're going to just
modify. Mashicha is necessary but not sufficient.
Correct. Mashicha is necessary but not sufficient. You also need to have a meeting of the mind on the price. If you don't have a meeting on the mind on the price, that's not enough. Then Mashicha is not enough. Hahu Gavra, the Amr le lechavre. If a person says to his friend, however, so now I tell Stan, listen, if I sell my property, then I will sell it to you for, 1 point whatever $1 million. And so as a result, but I go ahead and I sell it for $120 million, for $100 million, and I sell it to somebody else for $120 million. So Amar Rav Kahana thought, Kana Kama, the Stan gets it because I promised it to Stan, and Stan even made an acquisition, and we had the fixed price. Everything is true. So Maskif La Rav Yaakov Minar Pikod from Rav Yaakov from Nar Pikod says 1 second. Hi Zuze Ansuhu. Maybe the only reason I sold it is because the guy offered me 120 instead of 100. And so as a result, I didn't really voluntarily sell it, or not voluntarily totally. I got, convinced to sell it because I was offered such a high price. And so as a result, maybe I don't have to sell it to Stan because the price that I set with Stan is not the price that I ended up selling it to. So as a result, the Hilchos Karav Yaakov Minar Pikod, and that halacha is like him, meaning that in the end, if I have an agreement to sell, if I say that when I sell something, I'm going to sell it to Stan at a particular price, if I get a better price from someone else, then Stan doesn't get it.
But you have to be specific. You have to mention
yes,
that.
I have to mention right, 100%. But if in fact I get the same price or a lesser price from somebody else, then Stan would get it. Then my obligation to Stan would stand. And so as a result, Stan would get the property, and he would be the new owner of whatever property it was. Okay, so having referenced sale conditions, the Gemara considers other language that a seller may use and to figure out what kind of obligation is results as a result of that language. So let's take a look. So Amrle Kedishaimi Bislasa, if I say that I'm going to sell it to you for the price that that 3 appraisers come to, Afilu Tremi Go Tlasa. Even if 2 out of the 3 say that the price should be X, that's going to be sufficient. Because what am I thinking? I'm thinking that I say that when I want 3, what I mean is that I want a court to evaluate. And if 2 of the judges in a court were to come to the conclusion that the property is worth X, well, then the property is worth X. But if instead of saying that I want it to be appraised by 3, I say I want it to be said by 3, well, then ad to Amri Bitlasa. Well, then all 3 need to say the same price. And Kedeshaymi Ba'arba, if I say I want the appraisal of 4, well, 4 is not a court. 4 isn't any kind of number. So the fact that I said an extra person, ad to Amri Ba'arba, I need all 4 of them to agree. The kol shekain heka de amr like de amri barba, and certainly if I say as 4 say, then it means that I want all 4 to agree. Amr le kedeshaymi bitlasa. Now what happens if I say that I want 3 to appraise, and we get the 3 to appraise, and now you come, Stan, v'amr le idach. The other guy comes and says leisu tlasa achrini dekim lehu tvei. I want 3 other people who are going to testify as to come up with the valuation. I don't like these 3. Well, then, Amar Rav Papa initially says, Dinahu D'ma'akev. No, Stan has the right to do that. He has the right to insist on a different 3. Maskef le Rav Huna lebrei de Rav Yoshua. However, Rav Huna responds, Mimai dahani kim lehu tvei, dilmahani kim lehu tvei. Who knows which ones are better? So you can't know for sure that the next 3 are going to be better. The Hilchas of Rav Huna braid to Rav Yoshua. If I agree that if I say that these 3 are going to reach an appraisal and they're going to be the ones, you have 2 choices. You can say yes and no. You can say you want to buy it at that price, or you can not buy it at that price because you haven't done any kind of mashicha yet. But if in fact you want to buy it, you can't then say, no, I want 3 different appraisals. That's the halacha of Hilchos of Rav Huna braid Rav Yoshua. The halacha is that we don't know that the next 3 are going to be any better, and therefore we're going to stick with the original appraisal. And as a result, that's if the buyer doesn't want it, or if the buyer made the acquisition already and agreed that it was going to be the appraisal of these 3 people, then it's too late. They've all agreed. They've agreed to the price, which is going to be the appraised price, and they've made a transaction. That it's all done. Nothing more to do. Okay. Next. The next Mishnah deals with the dangers of doing business with both Jews and idolaters. Natal es hamashpech ma'umadad letoch tzluchaso shalovi kochavim. You take a funnel and you use it to fill the flask of a non-Jew. V'chazer umadad letoch tzluchiso shal Yisrael, and you then do the same thing for a Jew. Im yeshbo akeves yayin. If there is a reservoir in the bottom of the funnel that can hold any amount of wine, asur. Well, then all of a sudden, the wine in that second flask is all going to be prohibited because it went through and touched the wine in the funnel that is from the non-Jew. So hamara mikliya kli. If one pours from one vessel into another vessel, es she'era mimenu mutar, the one that you poured from is permitted, ves she'era letocho asur, and the one that you poured into is prohibited. And Rashi explains why is it permitted and permitted. Ubegemara 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down in the wide lines at the bottom of the Rashi in the bottom of the Gemara. Ubegemara mefarish. In the Gemara, it will explain, but Obed Kochavim Hamara. We're talking about a non-Jew who's doing the pouring. The Isrich Lashmi'inan Eshe'era Lutocho Asur. And it's telling us that when you pour into an item. So here's the fascinating situation. You have a non-Jew. You have wine on the table that is not mavushal. And now the non-Jew takes the wine and pours it into your glass. What it turns out is the wine in your glass is prohibited, but the wine that's left in the bottle is permitted because mishum kocho. V'ha'elyon, the one that's used that he's actually using to pour mutar delo gazer rabbanan bekocho lemeser hahu degavai, because although the wine in the bottle was shaken up by his moving, it is only the movement into a new vessel that causes some kind of prohibition. And we'll see that this is all a rabbinic prohibition, and so that is why it's going to be prohibited. Okay, so now we go into the Gemara. The Gemara addresses whether flows of liquid create a sense of connection. So again, you turn on the faucet and you see the water going down. Does that flow of water from your boiler in your building to your faucet and down into the drain, if somehow there was yayin nesach in the sink and now the flow of water touches that yayin nesach, do we say that, you know what, all the way back to the water in the boiler, it's all going to be prohibited because we say that the flow is all connected? So do we say that or do we not? So Tanan Hasam, we learned somewhere else. Hanitzok, this is a Mishnah in Tahoros, Perek Chet, Mishnah Tet. Hanitzok v'hakatar phrase, that if you have a stream of liquid, or a katafres is a stream of liquid, but instead of going through the air as if you turned on a faucet, it's flowing along a slope. Thank you. Ha'umash ketofeach, or if you have an area that is all moist, it's not wet, such that if you touch it and then go and touch something else, it will cause that other thing to be at least moist and wet. Or, but rather, if you touch it, your finger feels moist, and that's it. So it's sufficient, umash ketofech, it's sufficient to moisten, but it's not enough to get your finger to moisten something else. Eino chibor lo l'tuma v'lo l'tara. It does not create a sense of connection, whether for tuma, meaning that if you have a tame liquid in the bottom, and now you pour and you have this flow, or you have the slope, or the entire area between this tame liquid and some other reservoir of liquid is all moist, there is no connection. And as a result, the other reservoir remains tahor. Or on the other hand, if we're talking about tahara, if we have a mikvah that is sufficient in size, and now you have this other reservoir that is insufficient in size to be a mikvah, and even though they are connected by this flow, that is not enough to make the bottom reservoir into also a mikvah. On the other hand, if it was all connected, so for example, imagine two deep holes in the ground that are connected by a channel between them. Well, then, as long as one of those is deep enough to hold a necessary amount of water for a mikvah, now all of a sudden the other one is considered a kosher mikvah also. And indeed, that is based on one of the principles that we use in order to make mikvot. But in any event, ha'ashboren, and so on the other hand, hashborim, when it comes to settled liquids, chibor l'tuma l'tara, you can do it. Again, that's the case that I was just saying. If it's actually settled, meaning that there's a direct connection between the two, then it's going to convey tuma from one to the other, and it will convey tara, meaning it will make a smaller container part of the same mikvah, even though that container on its own would not hold enough water. Rav Huna nitzok v'katar phrase umashke tofeach chibor le'inyan yayin nesach. But Rav Huna says, you know what? All of that we just said is true about tuma and tara, but it's not true when it comes to yayin nesach. When it comes to yayin nesach, it's enough that if you have a flow and the bottom is yayin nesach, now all of a sudden the top becomes yayin nesach as well. Amarle Rav Nachman Rav Huna. So Rav Nachman asked Rav Huna, Minalacha, how do you know this? If you want to tell me it's because of a Mishnah, Hanitzok Katafres, the one Mishnah that we just cited over there in Tohoros, Hanitzok Katafres Umashka Tofeach, Eno Chibor Lo Latuma Lo Latara. And what you're saying is latuma ulatara hu delo nahavi chibor. It's only for tuma and tahara that it doesn't create a connection. Hala in yayin nesach have chibor. You're telling me that if God does create a connection with respect to yayin nesach, ema seifa. Well, I'll tell you. Take a look at the end of that Mishnah, because the end of that Mishnah says ha'ashbon chibur latuma ulatara. That if it's all settled, it does connect for tuma and tahara. And so you're going to tell me that it connects for tuma and tahara hu dahavi chibor hala in yayin lo havi chibor, and you're going to tell me that it doesn't? Of course not. Of course, when it comes to yayin nesach, if everything is settled, it's going to be connected. So as a result, it's clear that you cannot make that diuk from that Mishnah. You can't prove anything from that. So as a result, where is your proof? So effort number one, Tanan. Well, one second. What about our Mishnah? Natal es amashpech umada l'tok. And in this Gemara, if it sounds familiar, it is familiar. We saw something very similar back on Nun Vav Amid Bet. Tanan natal es amashpech umada l'tok tzlochiso shall ovid kochavim v'chazer umada l'tok tzlochiso shall Yisrael. Our Mishnah, which says that if you use a funnel for a non-Jew, and now you use it for a Jew. If there's any kind of reservoir there, asur, the wine in the Jew's flask is now all prohibited. Ha keves yayin b'mai matasra. Now, how did the reservoir become prohibited? Lav b'nitzok. Isn't it because the flow connected the funnel to the yayin nesach that was in the non-Jew's flask? And shmamina nitzuk chibur, and that shows that you have the stream constitutes a connection. No, Tani Rebbe Chia taught a brisa about that. No, there was splashing, there was banging, there was some kind of connection between the wine in the flask and the funnel itself. It wasn't just the flow. If it had been just the flow, that wouldn't be anything. So one second, so one second, I'm sorry, so one second, what's the implication if it didn't actually hit the funnel? Lo, isn't the implication that the wine in the funnel would not be prohibited, and therefore you would not cause a prohibition for the wine in this Jew's, the second customer's flask? And therefore, tifsho tenitzok eino chibor. So we have this question of what's the role of the flow, and now we can say the role of the flow is that it's definitely not a connection. And so, shouldn't we be able to bring that proof in the other direction? No, not necessarily. Lo pichasato tzlochiso tivshot lach da'aser. Yes, if in fact there was the banging, the connection between the actual funnel and the wine of the non-Jew, we know it's prohibited. Nitzok tiboy. But if in fact all you have is the flow, we don't know the answer. So tashma. One second, what about our Mishnah? Hamara mikli lekli, the second part of our Mishnah, where it says that when you pour from one vessel into the next, es shema'areh mimenu mutar. Initially, we're thinking that the Jew is doing the pouring, and therefore, what is it that's causing the prohibition? And what we're saying is, when the thing that you pour into, or the pour that you pour from, is mutar, and the one that you pour into is prohibited. So what is the implication of the fact that only what's in your original container is permitted? Ha-de-beni beni asur. What does that imply? It implies that what is the flow between them is going to be prohibited. So shmamina nitzuk chibur, doesn't that show that the stream actually constitutes a connection? No, not necessarily. Because if in fact the flow created a connection, well, then the wine in the upper vessel should also be prohibited. No, halokasha. The kamakate katufe. We're dealing with a person who's doing like this. He's spilling a little bit and then he's turning it back. Spilling a little bit, turning it back. So as a result, there's never a direct flow from the upper container to the lower container. And so maybe that's the situation. No, but mikom chibor. But if you say, in fact, that there's still a connection, and therefore we can say that the stream constitutes a connection. But ulatamech, 1 second, if you're going to tell me that according to our Mishnah, there's a stream is a connection, ema seifa. What about the next line? The next line says es she'era l'tochohu da'aser. Only the things that are in the receptacle container are prohibited. What's the implication of that? Hadabeni beni shari. That implies that the stuff between them is permitted. So so that shows that we haven't brought any proof whatsoever. So now we have one more effort to try and bring a proof, and again, we're not going to be successful. Tashma hamara mechavis labor. We have a brisa that says that if you pour kosher wine from a barrel into a cistern, kiluach hayored misfas hachavis lamata aser. Anything that flows from the edge of the barrel downward is going to be prohibited. And so targum Rav Sheshus ba'ovid kuchavim hamara. And so doesn't that show? That seems to be a very strong proof that a stream constitutes a connection, because anything that leaves the original vessel becomes prohibited. So no, not necessarily. Targuma Rav Sheshus ba'ovid kochavim hamara. Rav Sheshus said, you know what? That brisa is talking about where an idol worshiper does the pouring. And so as a result, it is his force that is causing the wine to leave the original container. And so as a result, iovid kochavim hamara afilu gava dechavisa nami mitzer. Well, 1 second, if pouring is a problem, if the shaking around of the wine is a problem, why isn't it a problem in the bottle itself, in the original container? So koach to obikochavim midirabanan hudaser. No, the reason that it's not going to be a problem is because this is just a rabbinic prohibition, and hahu denafak libarai gazru rei rabbanan. And what got sent out, gets thrown out, is what the rabbis prohibit. Hahu the gavai lo gazru bei rabbanan. But the rabbis did not deal and did not provide any prohibition for what stays in the original barrel. And so as a result, we end up with no proof as to whether or not a flow connects. And this is a question that flows, pun I guess intended, flows throughout the Gemara, that we never seem to come to a proof. And so as a result, we come to the conclusion we on some level we have to be strict, and this applies both in kashrus situations and in other situations as well. That we will generally take the strict approach with respect to whether a flow constitutes connection. Okay, so Amar Lahu Rav Chisda Lahanu Saviosa. So Rav Chisda would tell wine sellers, namely Jewish wine sellers, Ki kailisu chamra le'ovdi kuchav.
Does it matter from which way it's flowing and who's doing the pouring?
Yes. If a Jew's doing the pouring, well, then it can't become prohibited until it touches either other yayin nesach or the non-Jew touches it. When it comes to a non-Jew doing the pouring, as soon as it leaves the original container, it becomes prohibited. Okay, and in neither case, whether the Jew does the pouring or the non-Jew does the pouring, as long as the non-Jew doesn't touch the wine in the original container, there is no prohibition of the wine in the original container.
So does it matter who owns the container? If it's a Jewish container,
if the non-Jew owns the container, well, then it was probably yayin nesek to begin with.
Right.
So it was assuming that the Jew owns the container. So when you measure out the wine for non-Jews, katfe katufe, you should be careful. You should make sure to pour in short spurts because we're worried about the flow. Inami napse naputse. Or you should shoot it, my sink has, one of these little
Power
gun,
wash.
power, it's not that much power, but the washer for fruit and vegetables. So yeah, so you want to use that if you send it into the thing from a distance. So as a result, there's never a stream, and you're going to be fine. And so as Rashi says, naputze nafse naputze. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Ya'amdu merachok, you should stand from a distance. V'yizriku hayayin, and you throw the wine l'kelav shalovet kochavim into the vessels of the non-Jew. And as a result, there's not going to be any kind of flow. So it's clear that Rav Chisda is concerned about flow. Amar lahu Rava lahanu shapochei, and Rava would tell wine pourers, kishav chisu chamra, when you pour it, lo likrav la'ovid kochavim l'sayeh ba'adaiku. Don't let a non-Jew help you, because Dilma mishtalisu, maybe they'll help. Maybe you're going to get tired. V'shadisu le'alei, and you'll rely on him. And then in the end, he'll do the pouring. And what do we know? As soon as it leaves the container, it's going to be prohibited. It's going to be his force, and it's going to all become prohibited as soon as it leaves the container. So there was somebody who used a siphon with 2 tubes to connect and to draw wine from one container into another. Asa oved kochavim anach yadei agishta, and the non-Jew came, and it just as I'm sure you are probably aware of this. If you begin a siphoning, it just keeps going, because once you get the pressure pulls the rest of the liquid out, and so as a result, when the non-Jew stops the flow of that and puts his hand at the end of the tube where it was flowing out, Asrei Rava l'kulei chamra. Rava says not only is the wine in the tube problematic, but all the wine in the original container is problematic, because it's as if this bottom of this tube is like the bottom of the entire container of the 2 things, because it's all coming out. It would all come out. So Amrle Rav Papa l'Rava. Rav Papa says to Rava, Amrle Rava Ada Bar Masna l'Rava. Or some people say it was Rav Ada who said, V'amri la Ravina l'Rava. And some people says it was Ravina who said this to Rava. B'mai, why is it? Benitzo, are you telling me that it's all a stream? Meaning not because it's all going to flow out, but because by touching the bottom and it's all connected to the other side, doesn't that show that you're paskening that nitzok is a problem? Shamas mina nitzok chibur. Are we supposed to learn from what your new statement that nitzok is considered a connection? No, not necessarily. Shiny hasam dekuli chamra agishta uvas gishta greer. No, the whole point is that because of the suction, the entire amount was going to come out, and so as a result, it's as if because he has his hand there, he's stopping the flow of the entire amount, and therefore it's all problematic. Amar Mar Zutra Braid the Rav Nachman Kanish Kanin Shari. I don't know if any of you follow baseball, but the Orioles have a home run tradition, a relatively recent tradition, where they have basically a water station set up, where you have a whole big container of water and lots of straws off of it. And you can drink from one straw while somebody else is drinking from another straw. So that's the structure of a Kanish Kanin. As Rashi tells us, Kanish Kanin, Kli Rachav, it's a wide vessel. The Yeshlo Shnei Kanin, Oshlosha, it's got 2 or 3 tubes, namely straws, essentially, Yotzin Mitzido, that come out of the side. V'nimshachin, v'olin kineged govayu, and they go up opposite each other, and so as a result, they're basically straws that you can suck wine or any kind of drink out of the container. The kishenost in yain befiv, and if you put wine into the main opening, mitmalin kolakanin, so as a result, the straws will now all fill up. And you can have a number of people drinking at once. We'll skip the next line, which is just really the description of why it's called that. And the Vav of the Mesoras Hashas says, Shari L'shtospa Yisrael v'ovid kochavim. And what our Gemara is telling us is that a Jew and a non-Jew can drink from it all together. So that's what it means by Kanishkanin Shari, that it's permissible. Biyachad, at the same time. And now let's go back into the Gemara, and then we'll go back into the Rashi. So we're back into the Gemara. Vahani Mili, this is, excuse me, where did I lost the place? For beginning of the third to last line in the Gemara, Vahani Mili de Kadam Pasuk Israel. The key is that the Jew needs to stop drinking first. Aval Kadam Pasuk Oved Kochavim Lo. But it would be problematic if the non-Jew stops first. And we'll so now back into Rashi. Second to last line in the Rashi. Shekol Zman Shezem Motzeis. As long as each one is sucking, Ein Yayin Shenogea Bepiv Oved Kochavim Chozer Lamata. The wine that is going into the mouth of the non-Jew, there's no backflow, right? That's what it's essentially saying. No backflow. So the key is that as long as the Jew stops sucking up the straw before the non-Jew, well then when the Jew stops sucking, so then what was the last little bit goes back into the main container. And so as a result, his backflow goes to the non-Jew. But if in fact the non-Jew were to stop, well then the non-Jew's backflow would go to the Jew. And that would mean that the non-Jew's backflow is Yayin Nesach because he's touched it. So as a result, that's the problem. So Rabba Bar Rav Huna Ikla Lebei Reish Galusa. Rabba Bar Rav Huna would go to the house of the Reish Galusa, the head of the Galus. Shara Lahum Lemishna B'Kanishna Kanin, and he said totally fine to drink wine from a Kanish Kanin with a non-Jew. Again, as long as you stop first. Ika da Amri there, and of course, as soon as the non-Jew stops, all of the wine in the Kanish Kanin is now prohibited. Right. So you only get to do it once. But in any way, Ika de Amri, Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Gufei Ishti B'Kanish Kanin. And in fact, some say that Rabba himself drank from the Kanish Kanin. Okay, so that is the end of that story. That brings us to the next Mishnah, and that is going to directly address Yayin Nesach mixed with other liquids. We've seen this topic many times already, but we haven't seen it directly in a Mishnah. And so we're going to get what's the story with Yayin Nesach mixed with other liquids in, we'll have that in the Mishnah. But for that discussion, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Shabbat Shalom. I will please note that the recordings for Shabbos and Sunday are already posted. So if you want to get ahead, feel free to get ahead. But they are already posted, I believe, on HIR's website, so feel free, and I look forward to continuing.
Does this whole discussion only apply to Shtia and not in Mechira? Because it seemed we learned before that the non-Jew put his hand in, touched it, danced with it, whatever. If we separated that part in whatever proportion, we could sell the rest of it, right?
That was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, but the issue is that I believe that we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, like Rav's understanding of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. I think it was Rav who says that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's the right to sell the mixture only applies when the mixture is in different barrels. If the mixture is all mixed wine mixed together, then we don't say that. So that's one. Two is there has been, you're absolutely right, or the implication of your statement is to highlight the fact that some of what we've said today, it hasn't always been clear whether or not we're talking about permitted to drink or permitted to benefit from. Clearly, if you're able to drink, you can benefit from it. But in general, when we said prohibited, we mean even to benefit from. It's not just drinking. So in general, most of the things that we've talked about today, either it's permitted even to drink or it's prohibited even to benefit.
Okay. Were you asking that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel we're talking about separate barrels?
I think so, but again, if this actually comes up, you should definitely ask a shaila. But I'm pretty sure that we do say that if in fact kosher wine were to get mixed with non-kosher wine, then we would say that the whole thing cannot be sold and needs to essentially be thrown out. That's again, it could be that with shishim, etc., maybe we, if it's just a drop, that again, that's where it becomes even more complicated, because then the question is, if in fact it was true yayin nesach, so then I think even if it were a drop, we would say that the whole thing should be prohibited. But if it's just stam yenam, then I think that we hold that it can be bottle. But again, if it comes up, please ask a shaila. Do not paskin based on our learning of this
Well,
gemara.
how frequently are non-Jews using wine to pour on their altars these days?
Well, that's exactly right. That was one of the points that Tosos made in connection with why, even if you say, Rashi wanted to make this distinction between the young girl yesterday and maybe it was yesterday or the day before, between a young girl and an adult girl, because of whether or not they know how to do the yayin nesach. Today we assume nobody knows how to do the yayin nesach. So as a result, the bottom line is we'll generally say that it's all rabbinically prohibited. And so as a result, if there is issues of a significant loss, etc., you need to ask a shaila, because there are leniencies that would apply, because you're exactly right that today who knows how to do a libation. All right. Have a fabulous Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Are you here Monday, Tuesday? What's the schedule?
So Shabbos and Sunday
Right.
Is Ellie, and he's already recorded it. Monday and Tuesday, I believe, is Dove. Dove is back next week.
Right. Okay.
I think he's back for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then I'll be on for all of the Chagim. I'll be doing every weekday for the Chagim. All right. Have a great day, everybody. See you soon.